Barbarossa began just after 3 a.m. on the 22nd of June 1941. German artillery erupted in a deafening barrage. Hundreds of bombers poured across the frontier, attacking troop concentrations. Then the panzers started to roll. From the Baltic to the Carpathian Mountains, German bombers kept up their attacks on airfields and Russian troops, destroying at least 1,800 aircraft on the first day. Panzer spearheads broke through on all fronts, and thousands of prisoners were taken. Stalin refused to believe what was happening. Right up to the day before the attack, the Russians had been delivering war materials to the Germans. Two days later, Hitler arrived at his forward headquarters, which he called the Wolf's Lair, in a state of excitement. So far, the invasion was a spectacular success. But disagreements in the German High Command slowed the progress of the spearheads. Many commanders believed it was too risky to open up such a gap between the panzers and the artillery behind. As the Germans captured territory, SS Einsatzgruppen, or mobile death squads, swept in afterwards, rounding up Bolsheviks and Jews for execution or transportation to concentration camps. Russian civilians were treated harshly, with hundreds being shot. Ironically, many civilians may have welcomed the Germans as liberators from the harsh Soviet regime, but Hitler's fanatical racism ensured the Russians' defiance. The Germans had attempted an encirclement of the Red Army at Smolensk, but after a determined counterattack, more than 100,000 Russian troops managed to escape the German pincers. But over 300,000 Red Army troops were captured. As the panzers pushed forward, small groups of Russian soldiers were left between them and the advancing infantry. These groups were a major irritant to the German forces. The Russians had new and powerful weapons, such as the fast and well-armored T-34 tank, which proved difficult to destroy. Only the use of 88mm anti-aircraft guns would prove to be effective. The German goals were still within reach as the Germans pushed forward. Moscow was in range of Luftwaffe bombers, and on the 22nd of July, bombing of the city started. Hitler, however, called a halt to the panzers' advance in order for supply lines and communications to be strengthened. But the Germans had underestimated the strength and determination of the Red Army.
The Soviet army might be weakly equipped, it might be disorganized and poorly trained, but it was much larger than the Germans imagined, and with the halt in order to resupply and to sort out communications, in July, they had the job to do all over again. There was a very strong argument for concentrating forces and pressing on to Moscow. Moscow was not just the capital of the Soviet Union, it was the centre of the railway hub, it was the political and administrative centre. Seizing Moscow might perhaps have led to the collapse of the Soviet Union. However, in what remains an immensely controversial decision, Hitler put his orders against this.
Hitler thought that the main offensive should now push towards the wheat fields of the Ukraine and the vital oil fields of Baku. For weeks, arguments amongst the German command would leave the panzers stalled. A Soviet counterattack from the Leningrad area caused the panzers to commence their march north on the 8th of August. The plan was to encircle Leningrad and then destroy it. By September, the Germans had moved within artillery range of the city and had started a fierce bombardment. Before long, the city would face an unrelenting siege that would last over 900 days. During the lull, the Russians had been shoring up Moscow's defences, and troops had been massing in the city. Almost the entire population of the city had taken part in digging anti-tank ditches and defences. In early October, the Germans launched Operation Typhoon, the final push on Moscow. However, their supply lines were vulnerable, and food and fuel was running low. But the Russians had an important ally.
Typhoon, beginning in September, almost immediately ran into trouble. It wasn't the cold, it was a peculiarity of the Russian climate, of a quick frost followed by a thaw producing mud. Very few of the Soviet roads of the period were hard-metalled roads. Most of them were packed earth. And the effect of this was to turn the roads into muddy quagmires. This slowed up the German advance, coupled with a very strong Soviet resistance, until the deep cold of November-December.
Heavy rain and high winds hindered the Germans' advance until November.